If the man you loved looked at you while you were carrying his child and said, "You are useless," would you still call that love? Could you ever trust someone again who had promised to build a life with you and then shattered everything in a single sentence? Emma remembered that night in Lagos as if it had been carved into her soul. The rain had just stopped, but the streets still smelled of wet dust and petrol. The air was heavy with heat and exhaustion. She had just returned from the hospital with a medical report warning her about stress and blood pressure, and she clutched it tightly, hoping Daniel would finally understand that she needed support, not criticism, not dismissal. But he did not understand. He looked at her like a stranger, the man she had loved for years, the man she had given everything to, the man who had once whispered at night that they would rise together, now said words that cut through her heart. "You are useless," he said. "You are dead weight. You are a distraction." Emma's stomach tightened as if the baby inside her sensed the rejection. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and her chest felt like it might collapse. She had met Daniel 9 years earlier during NYSC in Abuja. He was ambitious, restless, full of ideas, but had nothing to show for them. She fell in love with his determination, his belief in a future nobody else could see. And slowly she fell in love with him when he moved to Lagos to chase his startup dream. She followed, leaving behind a stable corporate job because she believed in building a life together. They lived in a tiny one-room apartment in Yaba where the generator barely worked, and food was sometimes scarce, but they had each other. They had love, they had hope every night. They prayed together on a thin mattress, whispering dreams into the darkness, promising that one day their sacrifices would pay off. She supported him financially and emotionally. She spent her salary on business expenses, helped design the company logo, created social media campaigns, wrote investor emails, and stayed awake many nights editing presentations or motivating him after rejection letters. She had invested in him when no one else believed in him. When Daniel proposed, it was simple. No crowd, no ring, only a promise: we will rise together. A promise Emma accepted with all her heart. Their wedding was small, but full of hope and love. In the early years of the company, they struggled with everything from transportation money to rent to food. She sacrificed her comfort to make sure Daniel could focus on the startup. She learned about marketing, branding, and investor relations to support him. She reminded him during his weakest moments that he was capable and worthy, and stayed by his side when the world laughed at him. Then, finally, Daniel secured a partnership with a mid-sized distribution company. Money came steadily. Investors started to show interest. Daniel bought new suits, upgraded his phone, attended networking events, and spoke confidently about scalability, growth, and market dominance. Emma was proud at first. She told friends and colleagues, "My husband is building something big," but gradually she noticed the distance he stopped including her in business decisions. He began to dismiss her suggestions, saying things like, "You do not understand this level. Investors do not like emotional thinking." When she tried to discuss budgeting or sustainable growth, he would snap, "That is not your concern, Emma." And he would walk away. His mother, Mrs. Smith, moved in temporarily, claiming she wanted to help Emma during the pregnancy, but her presence only reinforced Daniel's growing distance. A successful man cannot be distracted, she said. A wise woman steps back and allows her husband to rise. Emma tried to adjust. She tried to be careful, but she felt invisible and unappreciated. Then came the night that broke something deep inside her. She had returned from the hospital with a report advising rest and reduced stress. She hoped Daniel would see the urgency and offer comfort, or at least concern. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and indifference. "Emma," he said calmly, "I cannot carry distractions right now. I am negotiating deals. Investors watch every detail. I cannot afford a pregnant wife acting emotional." She blinked, confused, and said softly, "Daniel, I left my job to support this company. I invested my savings. I stayed when things were uncertain." He shook his head and replied, "That was your responsibility. As my wife, do not exaggerate your importance." His mother nodded in agreement and added a wise woman, knows when to step back and let her. Husband focus on progress. Emma felt a wave of humiliation crush her. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, supporting him, encouraging him, praying for his success. And now she was reduced to a liability. The baby kicked inside her as if trying to comfort her. She reached for Daniel's hand. I am not your enemy. I whispered, I am your wife, instead of softening. He pulled away and said, stress is not good for my business lately. You are the source of it. Then he walked into the bedroom, brought out her small suitcase and said, when you become useful, come back. Emma felt the world shift beneath her. She had expected arguments. Maybe anger, maybe regret, but not cold dismissal. She packed slowly, folding baby clothes she had secretly bought. Touching each one as if it could shield her from heartbreak, she hoped he would stop her. Hoped he would remember the girl who had believed in him when he had nothing, the woman who had wiped his tears, the partner who had sacrificed everything, but he did not stop her, not once. He continued scrolling on his phone, his expression detached, almost indifferent as she walked down the stairs holding her stomach. The baby moved again, and she whispered, I am sorry, my love. I am sorry. I thought love would protect us outside. The Lagos streets were humid and crowded, cars honked, people shouted. Life moved on, as if her pain was invisible. The streetlights flickered, and the rain began to drizzle lightly. She entered a taxi with a small bag and 2,000 naira. Unsure where she would go, unsure what her next move would be, the driver asked where she wanted to go, and she murmured, Ika, my sister's place. Her mind replayed every memory, every sacrifice, every time she had believed in Daniel. She questioned herself, did I love too much? Did I reduce myself for someone who would never see my worth? Her heart ached, but deep inside a quiet determination began to grow. Rebecca, her sister, opened the door that night and hugged her tightly, saying nothing but offering the comfort of presence. Emma lay on the borrowed bed, feeling the baby kick, and made a silent promise. Not a promise of revenge, but a promise of survival. She would rebuild herself for the child, for her dignity, and for the woman she had allowed herself to become while trying to make Daniel succeed. She would learn, she would grow. She would create a life that no one could dismiss. She realized in that moment that love alone was never enough. Love without recognition, respect, and partnership could be painful, even destructive, but the same love, channeled wisely, could become fuel. Emma allowed herself one night of tears, one night of grief. Before she began to plot her future quietly in her mind, she imagined starting her own business. Using all the knowledge she had acquired helping Daniel, she remembered every pitch deck she had edited, every email she had written, every late night she had sacrificed, and thought, I can do this myself, she whispered to her baby. I will protect you. I will build for you. We will rise together without waiting for anyone's approval. She felt fear, but also a flicker of hope. The journey would be long and hard, but she would never again let someone else define her worth. The woman Daniel had called useless was already beginning. The journey that would transform her pain into strength and betrayal into power. The night grew long, and Emma sat by the window watching the Lagos skyline shimmer in the rain and lights, thinking about the girl she had been and the woman she would become. One day, Daniel would understand. One day the world would see. And one day she would stand tall, not because he had allowed it, but because she had earned it herself. The morning after arriving at her sister Rebecca's apartment, Emma woke up with a heaviness that made it difficult to even move. Her body ached, and her swollen feet reminded her constantly of the life growing inside her and of the man who had declared her useless. She lay in the small borrowed bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow, as if someone had stripped her of her identity. She tried to remember the girl she had been before love had made her vulnerable, before trust had felt like a shield. She pressed her hands to her stomach and whispered, I am sorry. My love, I will protect you even if the world does not. Emma had no money beyond the few naira she had carried with her from the taxi ride. She had no job and no home. Her parents were gone, and her only family nearby was Rebecca, her quiet, steady sister, who had opened her door without question that night. Emma had cried quietly into Rebecca's arms, But in the morning, she knew tears alone would not rebuild her life. Rebecca brought her a small cup of tea and a slice of bread and said gently, "You cannot stay in this state. You need to eat and plan. You cannot allow him to destroy you before the baby is even born." Emma nodded weakly. Not yet able to speak her mind, replayed Daniel's words, useless dead-weight distractions. They had burned into her soul and refused to leave. She had invested everything in him, sacrificed her career, her health, and her sleep to help him succeed. And yet he had dismissed her like she was nothing. Her chest tightened as if the world had collapsed. Around her the baby kicked, and she placed her hands over her stomach, whispering softly, "I will protect you. I will make a life for you he will not define." Emma left the apartment to look for work, walking the busy streets of Achaia with a mix of fear and determination, each horn, each shouting vendor, each pedestrian rushing past, reminded her that the city did not care about personal pain. Life went on, regardless, and she had to find a way to survive. She went to a small printing company and asked if they needed help with marketing and branding. The manager hesitated when he saw her pregnant belly and worn shoes, but Emma smiled and said, "I can bring clients and create campaigns." He reluctantly agreed to give her a trial assignment. The pay was small, but enough to rent a tiny room above a shop and buy some basic necessities. The room was cramped but clean, and she set it up carefully. Creating a small corner she imagined for her baby, she began living frugally, counting every naira, cooking simple meals, walking to work to save transport money. Yet in the midst of hardship, she felt a spark of freedom. For the first time in years, she was making decisions solely for herself and her child. She was no longer invisible to herself. She began each day at the small office, working with focus and precision, learning to navigate client demands, deadlines, and Lagos traffic became a rhythm. She met other women in similar situations who had faced betrayal, abandonment, and hardship. Listening to their stories reminded her she was not alone and gave her strength. Each story became a lesson, a reminder that survival required courage, planning, and determination. One afternoon, while delivering a proposal to a client, Emma passed a tech startup event in Victoria Island. She saw Daniel laughing with investors. Surrounded by well-dressed men and women, confident and admired, she froze for a moment, the memories of their shared dreams crashing against her chest. The first time he had whispered, "I will rise, and you will rise with me." The nights she had stayed awake editing pitch decks, writing emails, strategizing for him, she felt a mix of anger, grief, and disbelief. He had risen, yes. But without her, she whispered under her breath, "I will not be invisible. I will not be forgotten." That night, she sat on the small balcony of her room, sketching ideas for her own business. She thought about all the skills she had honed, helping Daniel with marketing, branding, client outreach, and strategy. Those skills were hers. They were powerful. She realized she could start her own company helping startups with marketing and logistics solutions. She reached out to contacts she had made in her career, quietly building her own client list while life remained hard. Emma threw herself into planning. She balanced work, pregnancy, and the early stages of her venture with meticulous care. Every evening, she would sit on her balcony, looking at the Lagos skyline, exhausted but determined, feeling the baby move and whispering daily, "I will give you a life they cannot take away." Each small win became a testament to her resilience. Each setback became a lesson. She faced rejection from clients, financial strain, exhaustion, and moments of self-doubt, but she refused to give in. On nights when she felt hopeless, she would think of Daniel's words and let them fuel her resolve. Useless dead weight. She would turn those words into fire. She would prove them wrong without speaking to him, without revenge. Only through the strength of her actions. Rebecca became her anchor, celebrating every small success, offering guidance when Emma felt overwhelmed, and reminding her of her worth. Emma began attending seminars, networking events, and workshops to grow her knowledge. She learned more about branding, digital marketing, client acquisition, and business management. She grew confident in her abilities and started mentoring other women who had faced betrayal or abandonment. Finding healing in helping others, Emma's body grew heavier as her pregnancy progressed. Yet her mind sharpened, she made every decision carefully, thinking not only of survival, but of the life she wanted to build. For her child, she refused to be defined by Daniel's rejection. She was no longer the girl who had blindly believed in someone else's promises. She was the mother, the entrepreneur, the woman who would not allow anyone else to define her worth. One rainy evening, after a long day of client meetings, Emma saw Daniel again. He was speaking to investors across the street, laughing and gesturing, as if the years of betrayal had never existed. She felt a rush of old pain, but also a strange clarity. She no longer needed his approval. She was building her own life, her own legacy. She held her belly and whispered silently, "The woman you called Eustace is building a life of her own." That night, Emma sat on her balcony, watching the rain streak across the city lights, and remembered the girl who had been thrown out. Humiliated and heartbroken, she smiled faintly. Her heart still ached, but it had begun to harden with resolve. Pain had become fuel, betrayal had become motivation. She began drafting proposals for larger clients. Planning her own office and saving for a proper launch event, she worked from dawn until late at night, learning, planning, and building, always with her child in mind. Each kick, each movement of her baby reminded her why she had to succeed. She whispered, "I will make you strong. I will give you a future." Emma began to see the results of her efforts. Her reputation as reliable, intelligent, and creative started to spread. She gained clients who appreciated her skill and honesty. She mentored young women who had faced adversity and found fulfillment in helping them achieve their goals. She realized that survival alone was not enough. She wanted to thrive. She wanted to create something that could not be taken from her. Daniel's absence became a lesson rather than a wound. She reflected on every sacrifice she had made for him and decided those skills and experiences would not go to waste. They would be the foundation of her independence. Her determination grew with each day, fueled by love for her child, anger at betrayal, and belief in herself. She would not be powerless again. She had learned that love without recognition or respect could be painful, even destructive, but the same love, focused inward, could become strength. She was no longer Emma, the girl Daniel had dismissed. She was Emma, the mother, the entrepreneur, the woman who would rise and build her own legacy. She whispered softly into the quiet night, "I will not be useless. I will not be forgotten. I will rise, and so will my child." And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would transform heartbreak into triumph, betrayal into empowerment, and pain into unstoppable strength. Months passed, and Emma's life had transformed in ways she had once only dreamed of. She had given birth to a healthy baby boy, Noah, whose presence filled her heart with both fear and joy. Every kick, every cry reminded her that she had a purpose stronger than pain, stronger than betrayal. Every sleepless night became a testament to survival. She moved into a modest apartment closer to her office, painted the walls with bright colors, created a space that felt like home. Not just for her, but for Noah. She had secured several clients, small startups and medium-sized businesses, all trusting her expertise in marketing, branding, and logistics. Emma had become known as someone who could deliver results with integrity and precision. Her reputation grew, and with it, her confidence. She walked through Lagos, streets no longer invisible, but commanding quiet respect. People she had never met would call her for advice, referrals, or partnerships. She learned to navigate the city alone, balancing motherhood, work, and ambition with careful determination. Each morning she would wake, feed Noah, prepare for meetings, and sometimes take a moment to stare at the skyline, reflecting on how far she had come. Every evening, after putting Noah to sleep, she would review proposals, draft strategies, or attend online seminars to sharpen her skills. Her life was demanding but purposeful, and she had never felt more alive yet. Despite the progress, there was still a shadow. She remembered Daniel's face the night he had thrown her out. The cold detachment, the words "useless, dead weight, distractions," those words had haunted her nights. And while they now fueled her determination, they also left scars that would never completely fade one afternoon. She received an email from a major logistics firm in Lagos, asking her to submit a proposal for branding and distribution strategy. It was the kind of opportunity she had once prepared for with Daniel, but never gotten the chance to lead herself. She smiled and poured every ounce of her skill, knowledge, and creativity into the project. Her team, a group of talented young women she had mentored, worked tirelessly alongside her, and together they produced a proposal that was innovative, precise, and impossible to ignore. Weeks later, the firm called Emma for a meeting. She presented her ideas confidently, walking into the room with her head high. Noah asleep in a nearby nursery thanks to her sister Rebecca, who had become her constant support system. The clients were impressed, and by the end of the meeting, Emma had secured a contract larger than anything Daniel had ever achieved with his company. At the same stage, she felt a surge of pride, not just for the money, but for the validation that her intelligence, hard work, and perseverance had created something substantial. She thought back to the nights she had stayed awake editing pitch decks for Daniel, the months she had sacrificed her career and her comfort. She had not only survived her betrayal, but had transformed it into undeniable power. A week later, Daniel appeared unexpectedly at a conference in Lagos where Emma was speaking about women entrepreneurship and strategic marketing for startups. She had been invited as a keynote speaker and walked onto the stage with confidence. Her baby's photo displayed subtly on the podium as a symbol of resilience. The audience listened intently as she spoke about struggle, bold determination, and the importance of believing in oneself despite obstacles. Halfway through her talk, she noticed Daniel standing at the back. He looked different, older, sharper. The arrogance she had known tempered by curiosity and surprise. Their eyes met, and she felt a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. He had not expected to see her here. She continued her speech, but inside she was already planning how she would confront the man who had once dismissed her. She left the stage too thunderous. Applause had made her way to the networking area where Daniel had approached. Her timidly Emma's heart beat fast, but her voice was calm. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. He cleared his throat. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you here," he stammered. She studied his face, noting the subtle signs of anxiety he had never displayed before. "You don't know the half of it," Emma replied calmly. "I have built a life, a company, and a future for my child. You see, Daniel, the woman you called useless is no longer invisible." She handed him a folder containing her portfolio, contracts, and client testimonials. He looked through it, his jaw tightening. His company had grown too. Yes, but the foundation, the marketing strategies, the client relationships, all the knowledge he had relied on early on had come from Emma's work. Daniel's eyes widened as he realized how integral she had been to the early growth of his business and how far she had gone without him. "I didn't know," he whispered, almost to himself. Emma smiled faintly, a mixture of pity and triumph. "You didn't know because you never cared to see," she said softly. "You dismissed me, you abandoned me, you threw me out while I was carrying your child, and yet here I am, Daniel, running a company that competes with yours, respected, growing, and creating a future you can't take from me." Daniel struggled to form words. A man who had once held so much control, now reduced to a stunned observer. He wanted to argue, to justify himself, but there was nothing to justify. "Emma," continued, "you see, Daniel, success is not about arrogance or ignoring those who love you. It is about integrity, skill, perseverance, and recognizing talent. You may have grown your company, but I built mine from scratch while raising a child alone." She paused and looked at him, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I forgave you in my heart because holding on to bitterness would have destroyed me. But I never forgot what you did. Every rejection, every dismissal, every cruel word became fuel for my growth." Daniel lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers. Emma's voice softened now but remained firm. "But this is not about revenge. It's about truth, about showing the world that your definition of usefulness does not determine anyone else's value." She reached into her bag and handed him a small printout of Noah's photo. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at the child, realizing the woman he had underestimated was also a devoted mother. Emma turned and left, Walking confidently into the future she had built, Daniel watched her go, feeling both regret and awe. Knowing he had lost not just a wife but the woman who had once believed in him more than anyone else could. In the weeks that followed, Emma's company continued to grow. She hired more staff, launched new campaigns, and began mentoring young women who had faced adversity. She remained grounded, balancing work and motherhood, never allowing the trauma of the past to overshadow the joy of her achievements each time she faced a challenge. She would think of the girl who had been thrown out. Alone, humiliated, and scared, she would remind herself, "I survived. I built, I am enough." Noah grew alongside her company, and as he learned to walk, he also learned to witness the strength of his mother. The bond between them became unbreakable. A testament to Emma's resilience and dedication one evening, as she walked through the Lagos streets on her way to a client meeting, she saw a young woman struggling with her business portfolio. Looking lost and desperate, Emma approached her and offered guidance, quietly mentoring her through the challenges the girl faced that night. As Emma put Noah to sleep, she realized that her greatest achievement was not the contracts, not the money, not even the respect she had earned. It was the strength she had cultivated within herself, the courage to rise from betrayal and heartbreak, and the ability to inspire others. To do the same, she whispered softly to Noah, "You will grow knowing your mother is strong. You will grow knowing your worth cannot be measured by anyone else's words." And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the story that had begun with humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak had ended with empowerment, triumph, and the kind of peace only those who have endured and risen from pain could ever truly feel. Emma had returned not just as a survivor, but as a woman who commanded respect, created opportunity, and had the courage to face the past without letting it define her. The man who had called her useless had finally seen the truth, not because he had changed, but because Emma had grown beyond the limitations he had imposed upon witnessing her rise. Daniel realized that he had underestimated the woman he had discarded, and that success and worth could never be defined by arrogance. Alone, the twist of fate was complete. The girl he humiliated was now a mother, an entrepreneur, a mentor, and a visionary. And she had done it all without his approval. Emma sat on her balcony that night, looking out over the Lagos skyline and smiling faintly. She held Noah close and whispered, "We did it, my love." The city lights reflected in her eyes, each one a small reminder of every challenge overcome, every tear shed, every sacrifice made, every lonely night. Every small triumph had led her here. She had taken betrayal and transformed it into power. She had taken heartbreak and transformed it into growth. She had taken rejection and transformed it into opportunity. Emma had become more than Daniel could ever imagine, more than anyone could measure, more than anyone could dismiss. She was a force, a mother, a survivor, a leader, a woman who had turned trauma into triumph and pain into power, and she knew that nothing could ever take that from her.